Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a DDR5 underclock, basically as a follow-up to the previous video about how inconsistent Intel's memory controller is at high memory speeds. So now we're not at a high memory speed. Anyway, the system specs that I'm using here is the Core i5-13600K on a Gigabyte Z790 AORS Master, with a Kingston Fury Renegade 7200 CL38 Hynix 16 gigabit A-die based memory kit. It's a single rank kit, so two 16 gig DIMMs. And the settings that I'm running it at is DDR5 6000 with some of the tightest timings I've ever used. Yeah, it ran Y-Cruncher VST for an hour, and then after running Y-Cruncher VST, I just started HCImemtest, and I've just let it run for like almost 2 days now. And there's 8,000% coverage. And you'll notice something, there are no errors. Because, yeah, like, it's not normal to get an error every 12-ish hours due to cosmic radiation, or power instability, or any number of other wacky reasons that the comments came up with to excuse the fact that at high speeds the Intel memory controller just really struggles to tell the difference between a 1 and a 0, and so if you run it long enough, eventually it does make a mistake and either reads a 1 as a 0 or a 0 as a 1. Yeah. And it doesn't happen at DDR5 6000. It doesn't happen at DDR5 6000 even if you run completely absurd memory timings. And the other thing I wanted to address is the temperatures. The temperature sensors on these memory sticks are terrible. So as you can see, like these have been running, you know, HCImemtest pretty much nonstop. And they're sitting at 35 degrees Celsius right now and 36 degrees Celsius right now. There is a fan on top of them. The average temperature is like 35 and 36 degrees Celsius. And yet, somehow, the maximum temperature readout is a 47.8 degrees Celsius for both memory sticks. And this is because there's a bug on the temperature sensors on these sticks where they will just randomly read out a temperature that is like 10 degrees higher than the actual maximum temperature. I don't know why it happens. It's just kind of a thing. So, yeah, they just do this. Like, this is just a thing that these DIMMs do. The maximum temperature reading on them is just completely useless. Anyway, yeah, so it's not a cosmic radiation issue, and I will admit that, like, yeah, if you run any memory stress test for long enough and you aren't using, like, ECC memory, you know, on, like, the time scale of, like, weeks or months, you will inevitably get an error even if you're at, like, JADEC settings. But you shouldn't be getting an error every 5 to 12 hours. That's not normal. If that was normal, your system would be completely unusable. So, yeah. Anyway, or, well, like, you shouldn't be getting errors overnight. Like, you should be able to run pretty much any memory stress test, or really any stress test, overnight and not have it get any errors, unless you were incredibly unlucky. And based on the fact that, like, I keep getting errors at high memory speeds on Intel CPUs pretty much no matter when I run them, I'd say it's not a luck thing, it's just the memory controller frickin' sucks. But anyway, yeah, at DDR5 6000, you can run this all day for it's been running for like 2 days now, so yeah, there's no errors. Like, imagine that. It's just like, But, so we've talked about, yeah, so not cosmic radiation. Also, like, I've run the microwave while stress testing this. I've run the toaster. I've taken a shower. I have a flow-through shower, so that's, like, basically the highest power consumption appliance that I have in my flat. And none of that affected the stability of this memory overclock. Like, yeah, so it's like, I'd say that rules out power issues. I'd say that rules out cosmic radiation. It doesn't really rule out the temperature side of things, but, like, the DIMMs weren't, like, in the previous video, the DIMMs weren't actually hitting 63.8 degrees. I don't know what they were running at. They were probably somewhere in, like, the mid-50s, maybe low 50s. Because I didn't have a fan directly on top of them, just sort of near them. But yeah, so it's not temperature, it's not cosmic radiation, it's not freaking power. And then another thing that I've seen is some people saying, like, oh, BuildZoid, you're just setting your timings way too damn low. And no, I'm not. Like, this is, you know, and that's, like, why I'm getting errors at, like, 1,000% in HCImemtest. And it's just like, no, because, like, we're at 6,000, CL28, 37, 37, 37, 28, 1T command rate, TRRDSG of 6, which incidentally, TRRDSG of 6 generally doesn't work on Hynix A-die memory sticks, and it also doesn't work on a lot of M-die memory sticks. But there's a trick to getting it to work, and that trick is if you just shove more voltage into the memory sticks. I'm running 1.65 volts into them right now. You can basically brute force the circuitry that, handles activation commands to work faster. Because, like, it's the same principle as CPU overclocking. If you apply more voltage to the transistors in your CPU, they can switch faster, and then you can run higher frequencies. And if you apply more voltage to the transistors making up your memory sticks, because believe it or not, memory sticks have transistors in them, so you can apply more voltage to those transistors, and sometimes you can run the transistors faster by doing that, because not technically all memory sticks won't necessarily scale with voltage, but some memory sticks do. And the whole reason why Hynix memory chips are so popular for DDR5, like for DDR5 overclocking right now, is because they scale with voltage. So if you want to run lower TRRDSG, well, you just need to give it enough voltage to run lower TRRDSG. At 1.45 volts, if I try to set TRRDSG to 6, it doesn't work at all. But at 1.65 volts, it works just fine. It can run 8,000% of HCImemtest. Yeah. Then we have TRRDDG, which is at 4, which works even at lower voltages, so that's not really anything special. My TRFC is at 444, which is a rather low TRFC. It's not minimized, I don't think, but I couldn't be bothered. Like, TRFC is not one of those timings that I'm, like, super concerned about, especially when your refresh interval is 123,000, which is another thing that I saw people bring up is like, oh, BuildZoid, you're using a too high refresh interval. Now, the funny thing about the refresh interval timing is that it's pretty much the only timing that actually gets looser as you increase your clock speed. So, 1, 2, 3... 4, 5, 6, divided by, actually we're going to divide it by 3, because our memory clock is 3 gigahertz, and memory timings are measured in clock cycles, not data rate. So we're going to divide it by 3, and we end up with a refresh interval of 41 microseconds. Off the top of my head, I want to say the, DDR5 stock refresh interval is, 7 microseconds or something. It might be less than that. It's like some single-digit number of microseconds. But anyway, at 6,000, we have a refresh interval of 41 microseconds. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I can't apparently operate a mouse very well, divided by, say, well, at 7,600, it would be 3.8, is 32 microseconds. That is a more frequent refresh. So if 123 refresh interval works at 6,000, it should also work at 7,600. In fact, it should be easier to do at 7,600 than it is at 6,000. So, yeah. Then below that, we have my TWR timing, which doesn't actually exist on Intel CPUs, which is why it's possible for it to be completely bugged out. So we're just going to skip over that. Then we have TRTP. TRTP on Hynix A-die memory chips generally doesn't go below 12. Unless, of course, you shove a bunch of voltage into them. So it does 8. Anyway, TFAW's at 16. Now, TFAW's an extension timing, so we really don't have to... you can set TFAW to 16 pretty much whenever, because it just adds more delay on top of your TRRD timings if they're too fast, which, I mean, my shortest TRRD is 4, so TFAW doesn't actually do anything in this scenario. Then we have a TCKE of 4, which is as low as the register goes on the CPU, according to Intel's documentation. Then we have a cast write latency of 16, which, blows the minds of anybody who, thinks that your cast write latency needs to be cast latency -2. Mind you, CL26 does not post. Or I think I tried CL26 and the system was very unhappy about that for some reason. But cast write latency of 16, yeah, that's fine. Because the funny thing about cast latency and cast write latency is that they control completely different operations. I know they both have casts in the name, but the important part, or really the most important part, is one of them is for read operations and the other is for write operations. What cast latency controls is the delay between a read command and the memory chip actually outputting the data. And what happens during that time period is you send your read command to the memory chip, and the memory chip receives the read command, and then it moves data out of the active row into the output buffers. And this takes a while because internally memory chips are really, really slow. So 16 bits of data get moved in parallel into the output buffers so that they can be output in series over the course of 8 clock cycles. And this takes a while, and that's why your cast latency regularly has to be quite high. But write cast latency doesn't do that at all, because all the write cast latency controls is that the memory chip has to connect the inputs to the correct part of the row before the write data shows up. Right? The memory controller sends a write command, and then 16 cycles later, the memory controller outputs a bunch of data. And either the memory chip connects the input port, like either it manages to connect the I/O to the correct part of the row in 16 cycles, or it doesn't. Which is a completely different operation from retrieving a bunch of data from the active row and then putting it into the output buffers. Like, this is completely separate circuitry. There's no reason they would have to run the same freaking timings. Well, okay, it's not completely separate circuitry, because you probably would reuse some of the connections that handle, like, reads and writes, but the mechanism of how these two operations work is completely different, right? In one of them, the memory chip is literally pulling data out of the row. In the other one, we're just shoving data into the row. Like, so yeah, your cast write latency, and the thing is, like, some memory chips can't do super low cast write latency, but Hynix memory chips can. Very regularly, you can run absurdly low cast write latency on Hynix memory chips. This is not an issue. Anyway, then we get to my back-to-back timings, TRRD-SG of 12. Even with 1.65 volts, that doesn't go any lower. I tried 10. It did not like that. Then we have 1818 on the read-to-write timings. And then we have the write-to-write timing, write-to-write different group, which is at 8, which looks completely insane. Even to me, like, I am honestly surprised that that works, but it does. Because, yeah, like, the timings, like, the JDEC specifications are not, they don't say, hey, your memory chip isn't allowed to complete write operations faster than this. They say, if you want to implement a functioning DDR5 memory chip, it has to be able to do at least this. And yeah, Hynix memory chips are really, really good at write operations. It's not particularly helpful in terms of performance, because generally speaking, your CPU is not write limited, it's read limited. But you can run absurd write timings on Hynix chips, and it really doesn't cause any issues. Anyway, then we have write-to-read timings of 56 and 44. This might actually go lower. This probably won't. And then we have a bunch of timings that aren't used in this memory configuration, like DR, DD, DR, because this is a single-rank configuration, so the DR and DD timings do not apply. Then we have write-to-precharge, which I have at 40. Which to a lot of people seems like, oh, that shouldn't work. TWR can't go below 48, except TWR doesn't exist on Intel memory controllers. Because Intel memory controllers, so what write-to-precharge controls is the delay between a write command and a precharge command. And the memory controller can issue write and precharge commands whenever the hell it feels like it. Now, obviously, if you send a precharge command while you're actively writing something to the memory sticks, that'll not work, right? But my cast write latency is 16, so if I send a write command, that takes 16 cycles, the write burst takes 8 cycles, so after 24 cycles, the write operation has completed, and, you know, like, so sending a precharge command 40 cycles after the write command is fine. It's not going to cause any problems. So my effective TWR in this scenario is like 16, I want to say, because 16 plus 8, no, that's 24. No, it is 16. Yeah. So my TWR with these settings right now is effectively 16, and you might be like, but Buildzoid, this is bugged out. Yeah, because for some ungodly reason, MemTweakit calculates the TWR timing from write to power down enable. And I don't understand why it does that at all, because write to power down enable controls the delay between a write command and the power down mode. And the thing is, you can go into power down mode without precharging your rows. Like, there is an active power down state. It's in the Intel documentation. You can put a memory stick into power down with active rows, at least one active row. Like, there's no reason that you would have to send a precharge command before putting the memory stick into power down. So I have no idea why TWR is calculated off of TWR PDEN, because these are completely these are not even remotely the same thing. They just have write in the name. Also, TWR does technically have a register on the memory sticks, but that register is only relevant if the memory controller sends a write auto precharge command, which, for all I know, the Intel memory controller doesn't use those. They're like, you don't have to use every single command that's available. I mean, depending on what you're doing. And write auto precharge literally just means, yeah, you can send a write command and then you don't have to manually send a precharge command. But if you wanted to, your memory controller can always send a write command and its own precharge command separately. It doesn't need to use write auto precharge. And if you did use write auto precharge, well, the memory stick has, as far as I know, the register limit is 48 for the TWR timing on the memory stick. So if you send a write auto precharge, it can't set, like, the memory stick won't do the precharge portion, the precharge operation faster than in 48 cycles. Like, and unfortunately, I don't know of a way to check the configuration of the memory registers from Windows. At least not, like, I've not looked into it. But anyway, so, like, super low TWR pre is perfectly fine. Because, like, it control, like... Anyway, oh yeah, and then just generally my power down enable timings are very, very low. But yeah, that doesn't cause any issues. So, it's not the freaking timings. It's not the freaking, well, it could maybe be the temperature, but honestly, that... The thing is, if it was the temperature, and because the thing is, I have run into, like, temperature-related instability when I was setting this up, which is, like, initially I started testing with, like, a much higher refresh interval, and that eventually started, like, building up errors once the sun came up. Like, the first round I started it overnight, and then the sun came up, and then I got a bunch of errors, and I was like, okay, it's probably a temperature issue, right? Because the thing is, if you have thermal instability with your memory, usually the way you can tell it's thermal instability is that it gets worse over time, right? Because as the heat builds up, it gets worse. Imagine that. But my problem with the Intel memory controller at high speeds is not that it gets worse over time, it's that it's just completely bloody random. Sometimes you get an error in 15 minutes, and then you don't see any more errors for the next 6 hours. Or you get an error in 12 hours and then no errors ever again. Which is just completely stupid. So, yeah. Here's, like, you should be able to run pretty much any memory stress test overnight, or even for 2 days, and if your overclock is actually stable, it shouldn't produce any freaking errors. It's not a timing issue because you can run completely absurd timings at low memory clocks, and it's fine. And if you scale these timings up to DDR5, like 7600 or 8000, they still don't fucking work. Right? Like, that's the whole issue, is that I've tried freaking auto timings, which is, like, as loose as it gets at, like, DDR5 7600. Well, actually, not at 7600. I've tried it at, like, 7800 and 8000, and it doesn't make a damn difference. And also with this 13600K over here, if I just turn on the XMP of these memory sticks, yeah, they won't run Y-Cruncher. Like, Y-Cruncher literally won't run on auto settings at all, unless I manually tune the PLL voltages. Because the memory controller, like... And the thing is, I don't even know why tuning the PLL voltages fixes the Y-Cruncher instability. Because PLL voltages would be like phase-locked loop voltages, which sounds like they should be somehow related to, like, clock stability? So it's like, wait, does the memory controller have a jitter problem? Really? Like, does it just slowly go out of sync with its own freaking clock? Or, like, is there, like, a synchronization issue inside the CPU itself? Because I'd assume the PLLs don't really affect the external side of the memory controller, right? And it's more like memory controller system agent ring that gets affected by the PLLs. But it's, like, still, it doesn't make sense that adjusting the PLLs should fix any stability. Or is the PLL, like, or they're not actually, like, or maybe it's not phase locked. Like, the other issue is that a lot of the time with hardware, you'll see voltages that have PLL in their name, and then they're not actually for any kind of phase locked loop, which is fun. So I don't actually know what exactly those voltages are for, but what I do know is if I turn on XMP with this CPU, and that XMP is like 7200 or something, Y-Cruncher will not work, unless I manually set the PLL voltages, which is just freaking, like, what? And then as you go up in speed, like, the stability issues just get worse and worse and worse. And auto timings don't help. Looser timings don't help. Like, I've tried TRCD 50 at DDR5 8000. Guess what that did? Nothing. It made absolutely no bloody difference to the stability. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, all of the stability issues at high clock speeds with the Intel memory controller are a signaling problem, either inside the CPU or between the memory sticks and the CPU, where, like, the termination settings might not be right, the timing skews might not be right, which you can't even, like, I don't know how to adjust them on most motherboard. Because basically what you need to consider is that each memory chip on a memory stick actually sends data at a slightly different time. Because the command address bus is a flyby topology. So there's like one memory chip that, like, if you send a read command, there's like the first memory chip, then the second memory chip, then the third, then the fourth. And each of those memory chips gets the read command at a slightly different time. And when I say slightly different, we're talking on the scale of like picoseconds, right? And the memory controller is supposed to deal with that. That's the whole point of memory training, is that the memory controller sends a bunch of data patterns to the memory sticks and then reads them back and then adjusts like reference voltage levels, termination resistances, drive strengths, timing skews until it reliably can tell the difference between a 1 and a 0. Except Intel's memory controller seems perfectly happy to just boot anything. Because even my worst 13th gen CPU is able to boot DDR5 8000. And also, like, what's a regular occurrence with Intel CPUs, if you push them like a little bit too far in terms of memory clocks, the CPU will finish memory training and then immediately crash. Which is like, so what was the point of doing memory training if you're actually not able to read the data? Like, what did you actually train? And basically, so the issue is like, so at high clock speeds, the instability is really random, takes forever to show up sometimes, right? Like, it takes, like, the DDR5 7600 errored out after 12 frickin' hours. So it's like, yeah, it might be a voltage issue, might be a time. Maybe my TRCD was a little bit tight, because TRCD is like one of the few timings that does cause a lot of upsets and does tend to cause late errors because it's not used super frequently, right? Like, you can send a lot of read commands without sending out an activate, between activate commands and like read and write commands. So the activate command doesn't get used as much as read and write, so TRCD instability takes longer to catch than, say, like cast latency instability or write latency instability. But either way, like, it takes 12 hours to catch an error. Like, this isn't practical to try fix, because it takes for freaking ever to prove that anything is even remotely stable. Whereas on AMD memory controllers, AMD's memory training procedure takes significantly longer, and if your settings aren't just right, it just fails. Right? Like, that's the great thing, is if you punch in wrong voltages, yeah, it doesn't post. Whereas Intel's memory controller will post with pretty much anything. Like, everything posts, nothing actually runs. And it's just like, and then it takes forever to verify any stability, and it's like, it's stupid. So, yeah. Like, there. And also, it's not freaking cosmic radiation when you're getting errors after 1000% of HCImemtest. Anyway, that's it for this video. This motherboard has a really obnoxious amount of, like, memory power delivery related coil line, so I actually want to turn this system off as soon as possible, because, yeah, I've had to listen to this for the last, like, 40 hours. Okay, not quite 40 hours. I've obviously been asleep while this has been running quite a few times, but yeah, I do want to turn this off. So anyway, that's it for the video. This is just sort of proof. Like, look, I can run absurdly long stress tests as long as I just, don't try to run them at high clocks, because Intel's memory controller just is stupid. Like, it just, like, whatever memory training procedure Intel has will just not, like, it doesn't have a good pass-fail system. Everything passes. It just doesn't fail the vast majority of configurations that should fail. Whereas AMD's memory controller, you set your voltage 15 millivolts too high and suddenly it doesn't post. It just gets stuck on the memory training procedure, and that's a good thing. That's what you freaking want. What's the point of a memory training procedure that's just going to boot anyway? Anyway, yeah, that's it. So I guess thanks for watching, right, like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the HOC Teespring store where you can pick up all kinds of merch. And then I've got a Bandcamp. There's a link to that down in the description below as well. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.